The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us once again Friday, October 9th, 2020 on our California, Nevada chat. My name is Len Dumas, Executive Director for the Northern California section of the PGA. And again, our gratitude to everyone who's with us today for advancing the game and continuing to sustain the game as we have. And that, of course, means following the protocols and the rules given our state, given our county, and in some cases even given the city. There are many regulations moving around at any one time. So thank you all for doing that as we experience quite a bit of success in our game and in our industry. To the team, Northern California PGA President Didi Moriarty, Southern California PGA President Tony Latendre, and Executive Director, Chief Executive Officer Tom Addis, Assistant Executive Director, Chief Operating Officer Nikki Gatch of the Southern California section, and the on-air team of Caitlin Doyle, Bryce Seaver, Tyler Miller. Thank you all for having us and getting us on the air one more time. And let's not forget, as we are experiencing success, which we're certainly grateful for, what else is happening. The first responders and those that have been directly affected in so many ways by the fires that continue to rage here in California, and every day a little more containment, as a little more humidity in the air. We're grateful for that, and hoping even for some rain to help them. But the containment percentages have increased greatly over the past 48 to 72 hours. So thank you to the frontliners for being there. Also, sadly, we do report the passing here in Northern California of a longtime LPGA, a well-known instructor and professional, Holly Juergens, on September 30. And I believe it was just yesterday or the day before, PGA member of the Northeast New York Section Hall of Fame, Tom Sullivan, who was killed as he was driving around the facility in a storm, and a tree that fell on his golf car and unfortunately killed Mr. Sullivan. So if anything, that's a reminder of how fragile that we are at any given moment. So let's keep our friends, families, and colleagues and partners at all time in our thoughts and in our prayers. So our speakers today, Dr. John Landsberger. And Dr. John, thank you for being back with us, and we look forward to hearing from you shortly. And of course, Craig Kessler and Kevin Fitzgerald, Director of Government Affairs and Assistant Director of Government Affairs for the Southern California Golf Association. So with that, I'd like to invite Northern California Section President Didi Moriarty to some opening remarks. Didi?
No, thank you, Len. First, so many condolences to Holly's family and Tom Smith's family. Or Tom Sullivan. Very heartfelt, terrible things to happen at this time. And just want to say hello. I hope everybody's air quality is getting better as it is in San Francisco. And basically, just as I've gotten out to teach more and more, you just realize what golf means to people. The people I've talked to are just so grateful for the opportunity to do something that just feels like more normal to them. So, so I hope everybody is well, and will enjoy a great weekend, and hopefully times won't get too tumultuous between now and the election, and we'll go forward from there. Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Didi. And Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Didi, and good morning, everyone. And I bring greetings from the Southern California PGA President, Tony Latendre. Also notable this week is the Kpmg Women's PGA Championship. Southern California's current women's champion, just winning a little bit over a week ago, and our new player of the year, Allison Kurt, is competing in the championship, had a 75 the first round. And so I believe she tees off a little bit later today, if not about now. And we wish Allison the best. And just to kind of fall in line a little bit with what's going on out there in the world of the pandemic and the seriousness of it, It's in the news still every single day, as you know, in one form or another. Look forward to Dr. John's conversation today in regards, but the focus is not going away, that's for sure. And the onus is still up to us to continue to do the good work we're doing as we keep saying, a recreational activity, and provide the playing field for many over the summer months, and we hope into the fall to get out and enjoy the fresh, clean air. And we need to make sure that we do what we do, whether it be with face coverings, whether it be social distancing, keeping the touch points, whether we're in a building or out of a building and on the golf course, clean, as well as our hands. That's what everybody says. And if we all work to that and work diligently to maintain those standards and those protocols, we'll get better. And I think that's what we can look forward to, and keep golf and our business and our game in the forefront of providing these activities. So thank you all again for that. I know I preach every other week about that, but I believe it's so very important. And again, thank you so much for what you do to ensure that we're all safe and healthy. So Len, thanks, and look forward to listening to the good doctor and to Craig.
Thank you, Tom. And most certainly, one day at a time could never be more true than now, and acting as an industry and acting as the teams that we are these days, leading to that great success and really looking out for each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce, again, gratefully, Dr. John Landsberger, a board-certified urologist specializing in urologic oncology. In February, Dr. Landsberger arranged for the hospitalization of one of the early cases of COVID-19 in Los Angeles. And because of some of the extraordinary cases that he has been involved with, in contact with physicians and pharmaceutical companies on the forefront of treatments for COVID-19 around the world. So Dr. John, thank you for being with us. And as you know, we are in various stages of openings and closings around both California and Nevada. We talk about vaccines on the horizon, as of course, our President Trump being in and out of the hospital of Walter Reed last week with COVID-19. And with that as the intro, Dr. John, we turn it over to you. Thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to your continuing perspective.
So I thank you, and I thank the California Nevada PGA and Tom for inviting me as often as I've been on this broadcast. In preparing for this, I was prepared about a week ago, and then, as you know, we had a lot of changes in the last week with the president coming down with COVID. So I'm going to try to address some of those things. But I also reviewed some of my old slides and what we talked about, and I think just as Tom described, things have not really changed. Washing hands, face coverings, social distances are the rule at hand today, because those are the available tools that we truly have. I think we all remember the speaking of Donald Trump when he said herd mentality. But actually, I think this is actually a good description of what's going on in the community today. We have a lot of people that have cabin fever. Thank God for the PGA and for other activities that people can start to participate in. But they're actually behaving, and I'd like to define what herd mentality actually means when he meant herd immunity. It's basically a mob mentality. You adopt behaviors on an emotional rather than a rational basis, and you start to behave in ways that you would not normally do individually. I'd like to start this off, and herd immunity, once again, is getting enough people with antibodies against the virus that the virus has a difficult time jumping from person to person, because that's the only way that's the only vector the virus can transmit. I'd like to remind us where we are today. Lancet, a very well and respected medical journal, published just last week, they believe the highest numbers of Americans is 9% that have antibodies to COVID-19 as of today. Next slide, kindly. So I'm going to go back to what we've done all along, and we're repeating the same thing that we've done before: social distancing, masks, washing hands. I think today, because of the availability of what we call a surgical mask, although you will notice on most of the masks that you're able to obtain, they say they are not for surgical use. This is true. In order for a mask to be certified to be used in a hospital, the hyperlink I mentioned at the bottom of the page, that's what they have to meet, those requirements in certain studies and testing. We do not, as a consumer, need to get those kind of masks. The ones that are 3-ply that are available, I gave an example here of Costco, very cheap, 50 of them for $1.99. This is really the standard we should seek. All the other masks that we see around people using, we really don't know how good they are or not good they are, what materials they're made of. These are pretty consistently good. And so I would recommend, as for you in your own practices, this is what you're basically wearing. And I want you to also say that physicians that are treating patients in non-COVID wards are wearing a mask very similar to this. That's what is considered the standard of care. Next slide, kindly. So I wanted to go over what's available today, because we just watched our president get hospitalized for COVID-19, and some people are curious what's going on here. So I kind of went through all the things that, and I can't nearly get to all the things on, because there's hundreds of different drugs that are being experimented on, but I'm trying to hit the high ones. So the ones in red are the ones that the president actually received. The ones in black, I'm going to just make quick comments about. Hydroquinolone, we know today that the FDA and the CDC and the World Health Organization now say that this is not an appropriate treatment for COVID-19. There is one ongoing clinical study of both hospitalized patients and ambulatory patients at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. I've read that study. It's a little confusing because their mortality rates are extremely high. But once again, I don't think this is a viable drug. Remdesivir. Remdesivir is the drug that we've all first came out. We thought it was going to be a miracle thing in April. It has shortened hospitalizations from 10 days to 7 days, and hasn't done much else. We haven't seen a huge impact by remdesivir, and it remains as a drug that's been approved on an emergency basis. That means it hasn't gone through all the trials at the FDA, but they feel that it's safe enough to be used upon demand. If a physician wants to use it, they can get it and they can administer it. Convalescent plasma, we've heard a lot about that. The interesting thing about convalescent plasma, this is taking blood from people that have already gotten the disease, have antibodies, drawing out the plasma and infusing into patients that are presently ill. There's two problems with it. We've been doing convalescent plasma for over 100 years. It never showed very great promise. And we also know the amount of antibodies that appear in plasma drop pretty rapidly 3 to 4 months after the finish of the disease. And so the point at which people can donate the plasma is relatively short, where we can count on it. Then we're going to go on to what we all heard about, monoclonal antibodies. And this is the drug that our president has raved about, in terms of that's what he feels has done the most to help him. I want to explain what that means. Monoclonal means one clone, one cell line. It's really not cells, but it's one antibody line. These came back from very old cell lines, and the companies that Regeneron is the first one to kind of hit the place, but there are many companies working in the same field, producing similar kind of things. They found 2 antibodies that they basically had on the shelf that they think work effectively against COVID. These antibodies are grown in the lab. These are not grown in human beings. They're not grown. They're actually done and they're brewed like we brew beer, basically. And we get big batches of monoclonal antibodies and we can infuse them. I want you to understand this is a study that started in August 2020. Cedars-Sinai here in Los Angeles was a major test center. Only 275% of the patients were placed in a placebo-controlled study. So this is brand new. We don't really know the data that's coming out of this, whether it's really truly effective or not. And then on what we can call a compassionate use basis, and that means a physician needs to go to the FDA and ask to use the drug for a specific patient, and the FDA can give permission to administer or get the drug from the company and administer to a patient. There's been less than 10 patients outside of the study that have received these monoclonal antibodies. Regeneron announced yesterday they have about 50,000 doses of this drug available today. Well, we have between 30 and 50,000 cases of COVID in America alone per day. They said they are going to gear up, but let's understand it very clearly. If it works and it's great, this is months and months away from being widely available. I think I can change my own slide, or I'll ask you to change the slide to the next one. Melatonin, this is, once again, the only reason I mention it is because our president was administered it. It's known to have some anti-inflammation properties as well as oxidative stress suppressors. There's no really studies that it works on COVID at all, but he's taking it, so I thought I would address it. Zinc, same kind of thing. Zinc has been shown in viruses to possibly inhibit viruses to be less penetrable and duplicate less rapidly, but there is no specific evidence that zinc has any benefit. There was some reports out of China that said this may work and improve people's outcomes, but there are no, as of today, there is no wide study to look at this to say this works or this doesn't work. The last two, same thing. I mean, he got them. I thought I'd mention them. The aspirin he probably was taking prior to the COVID experience, along with his Crestor for his hypercholesterolemia, basically hardening of the arteries of the heart, or as we get older, I think almost all of us are on Crestors because our lipids are increasing. And it was in fashion, and I happen to take it myself. Small dose baby aspirin at nighttime in addition to Crestor may be preventative for heart attacks or strokes. He's also taking Propecia. It's not very important. That's a hair growth drug. Just for completeness, I mentioned it. If we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little bit of history of vaccines because that's what we're all talking about. This is what we're looking for. This is our big dream. And I want to go kind of a little bit of some of the histories of how early vaccines started. So believe it or not, the first vaccine was done by Dr. Jenner, where he was treating smallpox. And what it was is he noticed milkmaids that were exposed to the bovine pox virus weren't developing smallpox. So he basically took a virus that was in the same family line and inoculated people. The way he inoculated was scratch them with the live virus, not attenuated, and exposed them to the bovine virus, and it worked. Louis Pasteur was the next one with, I'm talking about the big hitters, guys, so I'm not talking about every vaccine that was ever done. Louis Pasteur with rabies, and in 1931, the invention of the electron microscope really changed and started the line of virology, because for the first time, we could actually see a virus and see a virus in a cell and duplicating. So then I wanted to stick in here in 1935, what happened? We had a doctor that took what he thought was a attenuated or weakened form of polio, and he injected it into 3,000 children, and 1 out of 1,000 developed polio. And this was a really monumental moment in time, because the stall of the development of the vaccine stalled until 1953, when Salk basically took also a live vaccine, attenuated it using preservatives, and made it less effective. And his was the first vaccine to come to the market. Later on, 2 years later, Sabin created a oral method. And remember, polio is transmitted by oral fecal method. It is not a respiratory. And that was able, and I'm sure if you're all, I remember getting the sugar cube and the drops in my mouth. I'm sure most of you in the audience, if you were born in my generation in the 1950s, all remember getting these kind of vaccinations. Next slide, kindly. Okay, so today, what do we have going on with vaccines in reference to actually COVID-19? We have at least no less than 20 companies that are working on vaccines for COVID. Some are in, the ones that I mentioned here are all in 3rd stage testing, and we're looking to see their effectiveness. The FDA came out with rules shortly ago that said we have to, after completing 3rd stage testing, which means this is really safety and effectiveness. That's what they're testing for. How many people will build antibodies that remain, and how safe is the vaccine, so that we can give it to the larger public. And the requirement for effectiveness is 60%. That means that of every 10 people that get it, 6 will maybe get immunity, and we don't know how long that will last, and 40% may not, depending on the vaccine, but that's the minimum requirement to get FDA approved. Where we are today is we see somehow I mixed them up here, but I guess the lines got mixed up apart. But most of the drugs, most of the vaccines that are being proposed today are requiring 2 shots separated by either 21 days or 28 days apart. AstraZeneca, and this is where my typing became out of alignment, is the drug that came out of England in conjunction with AstraZeneca as the manufacturer. And we all know that's on hold now because they had some untoward effects. And at least in America, it's on hold, and the clinical studies on hold until they can determine there isn't a serious effect from the vaccine. The rest are continuing on. Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer are probably the leaders of what we're going to have come out in America, with Johnson & Johnson's being a single shot administration. Next slide, kindly. So this is the issue, and we hear it a lot in the news today, and medicine has become very political. And the question a lot of people say, well, if we have a vaccine, why don't we go out and administer it? And these are why. These are just some examples of where vaccines have gone awry, and we've had fairly significant problems with them. The other problem with vaccines are people's hesitation to take a vaccine, sometimes because of ill information that was given. I'm sure you all remember, and I can't think of his name now, a British physician that came out with the idea that vaccination in children was associated with autism. I want to remind you that very large clinical studies were done after that. That was totally disproved, and he lost his medical license. But still, we have a history in this country of, and the world, where vaccines were brought to the market fairly early, and fairly serious repercussions from those vaccines came. Some of the early vaccines, we have to remember, contained either the live virus or the attenuated form of the virus, or in Sabin's case, he took the shell only of the virus. That cannot get the disease, nor can any of the drugs that are being developed for COVID-19. None of them include the virus, the entire virus itself. So the risk that we're looking at is not developing COVID-19, but the side effects of the proteins that we're injecting into people. And I just bring you back to the Tuskegee study with syphilis. There were black men were subjected to syphilis and untreated, and the polio epidemic. And there's very interesting documentaries that you can watch on Netflix, and I would recommend you watching them, about really the evolution of vaccines in the world, because it's kind of a fascinating history. Next slide. So I think that's why we need the FDA. The FDA is our only assurance as an independent, and it has to remain independent, to look at, to make sure we are going to develop a safe vaccine that can be administered widely. The Russians, I should mention this, if we think this is a political thing only happening in America, I will remind you, the only country that's advanced stage 3 studies, and it's still considered stage 3 studies, is Russia, who took a vaccine as in immunizing healthcare workers and military personnel. It seems pretty reckless in the numbers they're doing. They plan on inoculating between 60 and 100,000 people, and they may not wait to see what happens. And they say they're going to sell their vaccine to 50 different to 50 different countries. We don't know much about their vaccine. Vaccines are being developed all over the world. China is developing a vaccine. Japan is developing a vaccine. AstraZeneca is a European company. So understand, nowhere in the world except for Russia, and Russia's still limited to the military and, once again, healthcare workers, are vaccines available. So it's not a political issue or football in America. We need time to figure out these are, number one, effective, and that they're safe. And then the last thing I want to point out, and this is my idealism in the world, and because we see so much turmoil in the world today, is what Sabin and Salk said, who were really the breakthrough in polio. They said, the question asked of them, who owns the patent to the vaccine? And the response by Sabin, which was also agreed by Salk, the public does. There is no way to patent the sun. And I think this is an idyllic way to look at our future. We need to unify, we need to understand medicine. The medical community needs time. And what, as the CDC director said very clearly, what we can do today is known, and it hasn't changed. Wash hands, wear masks, socially distance. That will have a profound effect. Let's not wait for a vaccine. The vaccine, until it's widely administered and we arrive at herd immunity, is probably, till when the vaccine is available, is at least 6 months to 8 months away. To where we vaccinate enough people is at probably 1.5 years to 2 years away. And then we'll have second generation drugs to be available for us. I think we need to get it under control by the actions we're having. And if you look at, I think that's the end of my slide presentation, is it not? I think that's the end, but let's just do it. Let's wear our masks, right, guys? This is the message that we have to have. Wear the mask. I'm going to mention something here that's of concern. It's brand new. Nobody really knows this is true or not, so I don't want you to say this is happening. But Europe is having a new outbreak of COVID-19. This is going to be their second spike in it. The more concerning thing about that is not only that more people are getting infected, but the hospitalization rate on those infected is going up. And this is not totally unexpected. If the virus mutates, usually it mutates to a more lethal and more contagious virus. So we need to limit its vectors. This virus can only go from human being to human being. If we stop that cycle, we can stop this virus. If we wear masks alone, nothing else but masks alone, we can cut the numbers in 6 weeks in half. This is proved by science. This is agreed by the FDA, the CDC director, there's a list of 10 prior CDC directors that wrote a letter, all agreeing with that notion. That's the end of my real comments, and I tried to make it brief.
Dr. Landsberger, thank you so much, and for all the valuable information of where we're headed, and certainly, as we talk all the time, the importance of washing hands, and as you just emphasized, wearing our masks, which can have such a great positive effect. So we do have a question. How about the K95 masks and the N95 masks?
Okay, so those are still in fairly rare shortages and should probably be left for those frontline providers that are doing in-hospital care of COVID patients. They are still in short supply. So, yes, they are better. There's no question they're better. They're better to the degree that what's important to recognize, typically when you're in a hospital setting and you get an N95 mask, you're fitted for it. That means they put it on your face, they see there's good contact, then they put basically a plastic bag over you, and there's either a taste or sniff test where they introduce a smell. Can you smell it? And if you do, then the mask isn't sealed. Or if you taste a taste, like a saccharine taste, that means the mask isn't sealed. So these are not things you can just grab from the counter, put on your face and say, hey, I'm great, I'm fully protected. I think that would be not a truism. So we want to see, and then I'll point out one other thing. When we saw our president driving around in his SUV right after being released, he was sitting in the back. He was wearing a surgical mask. The Secret Service driver in front was driving wearing a surgical gown, a half gown. That means the back was not covered. It was ripped, and he was wearing an N95 mask made by 3M with a valve. The valve makes the mask not an appropriate use. We know now that it may protect the user, but it definitely doesn't protect anybody in the community. So in hospital settings, we are not allowed to use masks with valves on them. Some have, and some hospitals will allow you to tape over them and seal them completely and still use the mask. But once again, these are not widely available yet. And if you're getting them honestly at the cost of a healthcare provider.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Landsberger. And we've all been encouraged to get flu shots so we don't double up having COVID-19 and the flu. Your thoughts about our cautions or this storm, if you will, of the two coming together as we head into winter and flu season?
Well, I can tell you what I did. I received my flu shot 2 weeks ago because I was afraid they may run out or get shortages. So I was early to get it. Now's the perfect time to actually get it. I think that's absolutely necessary. We do know from the south of the equator that because people are wearing masks and people are using better habits of washing hands and socially distanced, it appears, and this is just an appearance, that the flu may not be as bad this year because of the other precautions we're using. But why would somebody not take the flu shot? I mean, that's the question to me. You're going to gain immunity to one other virus that can only complicate the healthcare system. And that's a point that you bring up that's really important to understand. We do not have a uniform problem of COVID throughout every geographic area. If you look at West Los Angeles, which I can speak of very well, all the way from Carthay Circle, if people know where that is, which is basically where Cedars-Sinai is, to the coast, there's almost no COVID. And at Cedars, which is the largest hospital in Mississippi, there are 4 patients in the ICU as of a week ago. 2 of them have been there over 2 months. The other 2 have been there over several weeks. And there's less than 25 patients on the floor at any one time. So you would say, where's the pandemic? Well, it's the pandemics is in other parts of the city. We must understand that this disease has now divided the country by socioeconomic and cultural or racial divide. 50% of the deaths in California are Hispanic. That's alarming to me. That means communities, and why do you need to be concerned about? Because they're harvesting the virus and they're coming and cutting your lawn or doing whatever. They're going to still interact in your community, and it will allow for this virus to continue along. We need to help them, educate, provide proper equipment for them so they can go to work safely, because they are percentage-wise more of the frontline workers working in grocery stores, restaurants, etc., delivery drivers. The other 50% of the people, we can also say those are people with fairly severe, either very old or severe comorbidities, other diseases. And then we have somewhere between 10 and 15% of people that get very sick that we can't explain why they in particularly got sick and can die, right? So of all people infected, still 20% of those people are get ill enough to require medical care, including some supportive oxygen. So we need to avoid getting sick. And the only way to avoid getting sick is to wear masks, socially distance, and wash your hands at this point. That's how we can do it, and that's what we must do. I encourage everybody, go get your flu shot. We don't need another complication because other hospitals are totally overwhelmed. We see it every day on the TV. The Midwest, the central part of the country has hugely rising numbers, and it's very, very bad.
Hey, Dr. Landsberger, thank you. Yeah, most certainly, thank you. And as you did stress, washing our hands, face masks, and of course, get our flu shots. So we really appreciate Dr. Landsberger being with us again on behalf of the Northern California, Southern California, the state of California, and Nevada, educating us locally and also what's happening around the world with COVID-19. So we look forward to our continued relationship and staying close with you on this topic. Thank you so much, Dr. Landsberger.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me. And gentlemen, you're doing an excellent job. I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Landsberger. And next up, what's happening on the continued happening in the political environment. Did have conversation with our colleagues in Nevada this morning, asking if there was anything on the ballot coming up in Nevada that might be golf industry related, and the answer was no. So we do know, and I'll turn it over to Craig to talk about what's happening. We have a couple of propositions that do affect the industry, some more directly than other, which Proposition 15 having to do with real estate taxes, and Proposition 22 having to do with web-based apps. Again, there are some good signs in there as it relates to us, some a little bit more direct than the others, as I mentioned. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to the Director of Governmental Affairs, the Southern California Golf Association, Craig Kessler. Craig?
Thank you, Len. As I listen to Dr. Landsberger, other physicians, epidemiologists, doctors, And I realized that, and I listened to their frustrations at continuing to preach that with application of a few very simple things, our problems could be lessened to an incredible degree. It puts the frustrations, some of which I'm going to share with you in my short talk today, into great perspective. And I think maybe the best way to start with that is to give you a little bit of the flavor of the moment and try to explain to a lot of GMs and golf professionals who scratch their head and can't quite figure out why the makers of public policy are so contradictory, so confused, in many cases so aloof as to what may be going on. Let me just share with you that the Southern Cal PGA section was contacted by one of San Diego County's golf facilities over the weekend, pointing out a contradiction on the San Diego County Public Health website between what the county did some weeks ago, and San Diego County is not alone. Most Southern California counties, save LA County, and I'll get to them in a moment, have eliminated their golf-specific applications in order in favor of deferring to the state, sometimes with one or two wrinkles added in addition. San Diego did that many weeks ago, so that San Diego golf courses that at the beginning, when they first started back to play in April, had to fill out these rather lengthy forms that were golf specific. And now they simply have to adhere to the general recreational forms or outdoor recreational forms that is now statewide or by a state standard and governed by the state. San Diego stipulated to follow the general state. And everyone on this call knows that the state standard was changed many weeks ago with respects to double occupancy carts from the original language, which was single rider carts except for members of the same household, to double occupancy permitted if there is absolute separation between the riders in the compartment, and all the rest of the social distancing and particularly common touch control are adhered to in terms of not touching each other's clubs, bags, et cetera, and so forth. But this golf course in San Diego County pointed out that there was still the old language on the San Diego website. So the SCGA and the SCPGA huddled and simply determined to put in a letter to San Diego County requesting that they eliminate the contradiction on their website. And we assumed that would be a fairly simple act. They just overlooked this because they have a lot of other things on their plate at the moment. And two things about the response. First of all, they responded within less than 3 hours, which was very encouraging, and also has been the pattern, not 3 hours, but usually within a few days, throughout most of Southern California anyway. I can't speak for the northern counties. The departments of public health, or sometimes it's emergency services, has always gotten back to us. We haven't always liked the answers they've gotten back to us with, but we always understood the answers, and we always understood that those answers, while in some cases they may have been negative at the moment, we could understand how they may go from negative to positive, depending upon cases and depending upon other things that happen, both locally in terms of numbers and statewide in terms of how the state orders change. Now, again, I'll get to Los Angeles County in a moment because it is the great exception. What it amounted to was San Diego pointed out to us that yes, they were quite aware the contradiction was on the website because the contradiction remained on the state website even when the state took the action to change its own rules. And they felt duty bound to include both of them because they have to follow the state's minimum standards. They may have standards stricter, and for a long period of time they did, but they can't be looser. Now, with a wink and a nod, they indicated to us they had no problem with what had become standard practice in San Diego, but they also pointed out that they had contacted the state of California in August and again in September, asking of the state what we had asked them, which was to clear up the contradiction and go with the modern language. And the state had not answered them. But because of our email, they were going to make a third request to the state, which they made on Monday a few days ago. And they said they would get back to us if the state ever got back to them. Well, that made me feel a little bit better because I've had more success getting in touch with county health departments than they've had with the state of California. And keep in mind, San Diego County is the second most populous state in California. So I'm figuring that if the state can ignore San Diego County, anyone can ignore me and I can sleep well at night. But that points out, I think, what some of the confusion is. Things change, and then the old language is not removed. I would also state that many of you are aware that we had put in a very similar request, not so much to rectify a contradiction, but to really fix some very badly drafted language on what the requirements for face coverings were in Los Angeles County under the order, because it stated remind people. And we said, if remind people of what? Anyway, and that county, instead of simply changing the word remind to require or request, gave us a very lengthy explanation as to why remind really meant something that it doesn't mean in any English dictionary, very much a circle the wagons mentality, which had led me to believe that they are so far in over their head and so besieged that really to engage in a rational conversation was no longer worth the time or the effort. I'd also add that may be driven less by the persons working there, who are probably the same profile and no different than those responsive counties, than it is probably driven by the fact that Los Angeles County has 10.2 million persons and largely and is probably ungovernable in a pandemic that no one's lived through before. Something to keep in mind, perhaps next time, if you live in Los Angeles County and there's an initiative on the ballot to perhaps expand the Board of Supervisors or something like that, you might recognize that there may be that a 5 requirement that works for small counties may not work for large ones, and you need to have some representation a little closer to the people, in this case, the golf courses. So I hinted sort of that Los Angeles County was this great outlier, and it is. In 57 counties, group play, practice greens, practice short game areas are permitted under certain rules and regulations, of course, and it's still not in Los Angeles County. I want to give a shout out and some credit to Los Angeles County Parks and Recreation, which operates a very large municipal golf system and has been working consistently to get those things changed. And their own Department of Public Health has pretty much ignored them like they've ignored us. And so again, that makes me sleep a little bit better at night if they can ignore one of their own county brothers. Departments, they can certainly ignore us, but it's increasingly becoming frustrating. And I know many of you listening to this call are becoming frustrated. And I'll simply say that with any luck, unlike droughts, which we go through periodically, and they might add, as I pointed out to some public health officers, that my experience with the various droughts in California is that with each one, everyone learns some things and the government learns some things, and we respond much better the next time out. And my hope is that public health departments will learn a great number of lessons from this public policy response to the pandemic. And should we ever have another one, I hope we never have another one of this level, but we've had smaller ones periodically. They will have learned some lessons and will do better the next time. Len talked a little bit about some initiatives on the ballot coming up, and Proposition 15, sometimes called the Split Roll Initiative. Both the SCGA initially and later the California Alliance for Golf have put out some very detailed white papers to try to explain what this does mean for the California golf community and what it doesn't mean. And it means different things for different kinds of golf courses. It depends on the ownership. If the ownership is municipal, it means nothing. If the ownership is a C7 private club, it means something quite different. If it is a for-profit daily fee operation, it means something yet again. And the impact is different for all 3 categories. 0 for municipal properties. For private clubs, there's protections put in by the voters 60 years ago. It's actually Article 13, Section 10 of the California Constitution, which carves out some very special treatment for California's private golf clubs. Not private yacht clubs or downtown clubs or any of those kinds of things. So that many of you have been contacted by the State Club Association because they're extremely alarmed over Prop 15, and they should be, because much of their membership it represents clubs that have substantial commercial holdings, and they will be very viscerally affected by Prop 15 should it pass. The golf clubs, on the other hand, again, are protected by this initiative that the voters passed in 1960, which in essence is sort of the private parallel of something that came 11 years later in California, the Park Preservation Act. Together, they protect the two stocks of golf courses that are in California, the private clubs and the municipal facilities, because if they were to ever be taxed at anything approximating a highest and best use, we would not see 150 acres of green space, whether they're private clubs or public golf courses in the state's major urban areas. They would have long ago been developed because they would have had to be developed per the taxes. Never forget that when someone suggests that these golf courses perhaps get special treatment in the tax code, and just remind them that there are various things that receive differential treatment, and there are very good, sound public policy reasons for it. For those of you who spent any time in Manhattan Island in New York City and were aghast like I was many years ago that there are no grass playgrounds, that they're all concrete, well, read that to mean Los Angeles and San Francisco and downtown San Diego and a few other downtowns and somewhat smaller cities would probably look like that, but for what others may refer to as special privileges. So if Prop 15 passes, golf courses, those that do pay property taxes, the privately held ones, would be affected to the degree to which they would necessarily be reassessed valuation at least once every 3 years, but they would be reassessed on an open space zoning designation, which means that the impact would not be quite the same for the commercial and industrial property holders that are the real targets of this initiative, supposedly according to the Legislative Analyst's Office, roughly $8 to $12 billion per year. There is a substantial campaign going on, both pro and con. The pro is a little bit better funded, but the con has been catching up. There are some initiatives on the ballot that are pretty much dead on arrival because they're polling in the 30s. If you're polling in the 30s at this late date, you're dead. But this one has been polling in the anywhere near the upper 40s, which means that it's probably just a little bit more likely than not that it won't pass. And much of it, and the campaign will have much to say about that, but it could pass. So it will have an impact on it. Again, one of the reasons that I think the California Alliance for Golf put out this rather extensive white paper, which is available from all the organizations on this call, was to make sure that the golf industry understood two things: exactly what the impact may be to the degree to which you can predict it, because this Prop 15 would beg a great deal of follow-up legislation. Who knows where that would go? It would also beg some interpretations from different assessors. And in this process, one thing that I have discovered is that the assessors in the southern part of the state have been kinder to golf properties than the assessors, for example, in the Bay Area. And there's nothing, and that could flip 5 years from now. So there's much about this that's unpredictable. One thing you do know, if Prop 15 fails, and again, I think that's a little more likely than not based on the polling that I've seen, the status quo maintains. However, unless it fails by a wide margin, my guess is that we will see initiatives of this nature that takes the original Prop 13 from 1978 and modifies it in many, many ways every 2 years. And you may see some substantial moves within the legislature to make those changes to the degree to which our legislators have the courage to deal with something as hot as property taxes. Len also mentioned Prop 22, which is an initiative in which Uber, Lyft, Postmates, DoorDash, the purveyor, those who are in the sort of the app gig delivery industry, whether it's transportation or groceries or packages, are seeking a very narrow carve out, a total exemption from AB 5 for them and only them. So it would not affect the golf industry in any way. Now, those of you who have been paying attention know that we did extremely well and surprisingly well at the end of this legislative session, a legislative session in which yours truly here told everyone not to expect anything because the legislature was out of session more than it was in session due to COVID-19. And then lo and behold, we ended up with some significant improvements in the business to business for professional services exception in AB5 that applies to independent contracting PGA professionals. We received something that we'd been hopeful in the future, but not necessarily in 2020, for in a certain way, if it's provided by third parties, for youth coach exemptions. That's extremely important, whether it's Youth on Course in Northern California, SCGA Junior Golf Foundation in Southern California, the 2 PGA sections, various junior programs, not talking about the junior tour so much, but the actual junior programs. For those things, that is extraordinarily important for the business models of all of us. And then the final item, which I never thought would come to pass, there is a route in what ended up being called AB 2257, for those of you who like to memorize the numbers on these bills, which was a gut and amend transformation of the original AB 5 for caddies. So it's very complicated, and I won't go through it here. We put out materials that walks you through it, and the companies that are the third-party providers are figuring out, are tweaking their business models to hew to it, and then I'm sure out there vigorously selling their services. But it allows for independent contracting caddying to continue at those private clubs in the state that make use of it, and some of the resorts in the state that make use of it, through a third party and through a very complicated procedure. But that's something that yours truly had predicted probably wouldn't be available. So all I have to do is lower expectations and then predict that I won't do well and we do better than we think. And again, now you know why being a government affairs director is such an adventure every day. So I think those are the two things, other than the obviously elections are Rorschach tests of what the populace thinks on various issues. So always pay attention to all the results in an election. They tell you a great deal. But in terms of what's on the ballot specifically for golf, those two are Prop 15 much more than 22, and 22 is doing very badly. So that kind of confirms, at least in my mind, and I think it does in Len and Tom's and the rest of, let's say, the California Alliance for Golf, that instead of going that way of singling out and seeking special exemption, trying to work with the majority in the legislature, and particularly with Assemblymember Gonzalez, and we did work with her to achieve what we were looking for in a way different than special exception, and certainly something less than spending $200 million to seek it. And they very well may spend $200 million getting 35% of the vote if today's polls maintain. Final comment, and I'll leave it at that. I've been somewhat specific today, is that I'm just going to finish off with something that I used to open up a previous story that I wrote in SCGA's 4 magazine, in which I quoted then President Dwight Eisenhower gave in a famous address to the World Council of Churches in 1954. He issued the following words, simple words, which came ultimately later to be known as sort of the Eisenhower's leadership dictum. And it's this. He said there are 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent. Today, and for most of this year, we've been dealing with a lot of urgent problems. By definition, when I'm asked to give presentations on what's the status of legislation or regulation, I haven't even touched regulation. There's quite a bit of that going on right now, much of it very positive in the water world. We'll get to that maybe in 2 weeks. There are positive things on our horizon. It is that first nature. It's urgent and the things we have to deal with. But there are some important things moving forward, and that is COVID-19 will not be with us forever. We've been given, through tragic circumstances, have actually provided golf courses with a bounty that was totally unexpected coming out of this, which means there's a small window to harvest that bounty into something permanent moving forward. And I think everyone's recognized that. Whether we can come to terms with it, I don't know. So I would call that a little bit more of a really something that's important, but not necessarily urgent. And I'd also add that we know we're going into a recession. There's no doubt about that. And for an endeavor, no matter how bloated we may be, by being that one activity that's outdoors and eminently safe, and you can do when all the resorts are, when so many things are closed down right now, that won't last forever. So all of those problems we identified at the beginning of the year, existential problems dealing with our very claims to being able to access hundreds of acres of precious land under so much competition for so many other uses, not the least of which is going to be housing or homelessness. As an interesting aside, the Los Angeles County Business Federation does a pulse poll of businesses in the state's largest county as to what the key issues are, governmental issues every year. And over the years, it's been taxes, regulation, the usual suspect, labor, you figure it out. We're in California, correct? And affordable housing's always been in the top 4 or 5 because it is a real break on the business's ability to attract people to move to the state or even stay in the state. But homelessness, which was way down on that list, and it didn't even make the top 10 a few years ago, has now moved to number 1. And we're seeing in at least some of the largest cities, emergency measures that are really doing temporary, and it deals with some court cases too, temporary homeless shelters in parks. Many of them are in proximity to golf courses that are public. And so keeping in mind, it's very important to keep in mind what's in the air, what are the problems, and golf do understand that COVID-19, the fact that we're doing well, the fact that we're up 21%, the fact that we're doing better than virtually most other business, unless you're Zoom or Amazon, we're doing better than just about everybody. We've been lucky. We've been, in other words, we've been granted this through tragic circumstances, but still that problem is going to remain moving forward. We encumber a lot of green space, and it is not green space that's open to the general public. And if it's a public golf course, you still have to pay a greens fee, and it's just for golfers. If it's a private club, it's just for the members of that club. Our politics are turning extraordinarily populist, whether it's the populism of the right or populism of the left. That is fairly dominant. We may get a short break because people are a little bit tired of all the controversy, but that has been the shift that's going on. That's going to continue unabated for some period of time. And for golf needs to take that very seriously. And golf has not always been particularly good at looking at the macro issues. We look at a glyphosate, or we look at a water efficient landscape ordinance, or we look at an AB5, or we look at very, very specific things. And that's my job, is to look at those specific things. But those things are all happening within a much grander context. And that context has more effect on how those things go than we do, or than other parties do. And it sort of shifts things moving. Golf has to be very, very careful with its image. We know in some quarters it's not particularly good, and has to be particularly careful the degree to which we're perceived as elite. Everyone knows the drill. Now we can counter those perceptions with facts, but every time we give truth to one of those perceptions with one of our own facts, or worse, something that we say or we do in the public realm, recognize that we make ourselves that much more vulnerable. So my fond hope is when we come back to Earth and we can actually get together in rooms and so forth, and I'll finish on this note, and I've gone a long way from where I started, but then what else is new, is my hope that the golf industry can do what some others have done and just think through what is its position. We're talking about in California. Where do we stand politically? Where do we stand socially? What are the real threats? What are the real positives? And have those meetings. Many of you know I've been critical of our industry for putting forth bad narratives about ourselves, or allowing others to put negative narratives about our so-called decline on us without us coming out proactively doing something different. But that's for public consumption. Privately, we do the opposite. we do a little happy talk, and we're a little bit too optimistic when we're in our private quarters. And that's the time to be brutally honest about some of our issues and some of our problems, because that's going to be the key that allows us to be able to come up publicly and solve some of them. So with that, and I apologize for that presentation having been just a bit all over the map, I'll turn it back to Len and Tom, and be happy to answer any questions that I may have raised in all that confusion.
So Craig, thank you for continuing to help us navigate the complexity of so many issues affecting so many aspects of our industry. We do have a question on the board. Where do I find more information about the teaching of youth programs and how it relates to AB5?
Boy, that's a complicated one, and it's probably not in any one place, but C. Kessler at scga.org. Send that email, and if you forget it, lose it, the two sections know how to get in touch with me, and Kevin Fitzgerald and I will make sure that we take the answers to that question, which is in different places, and there are some internal contradictions in that as well, just like there are internal contradictions in everything involving COVID, involving everything, even within AB5, and we'll try to get that to you to give you some direction.
So Craig, well, yeah, as we look so forward to good news these days, we have the youth coaches, which have now been carved out of AB5, and then we have the referral agency, meaning the caddy issue, somewhat resolved in AB 2257. Do we not see those again as just another step in the right direction for our business-to-business carve out for our teaching professionals? Is it continuing to look better that we're just not there yet?
Well, the only thing that remains to be perfected for the independent contracting PGA professionals in the original AB5, out of the 12-pronged tests, 11 of them are perfect. One of them is quasi-problematic. And I think our goal in 2021 will be to fix that. And I think we have more than enough cachet and bandwidth to get that done. Now, I will say that there were 4 of them that posed certain problems for it, and yet those did not stop independent contracting PGA teaching in 2020. 2257 is now law because it was an emergency measure and it's been signed by the governor. So with that, it's that much better. I don't see anything that stops it. We're still going to work to make it 100%, but it's well into the 90s at this particular point. And that issue, and just to be clear, that issue is separate from that section of AB 2257, which refers to third-party referral agencies being able to provide youth coaches and, most importantly, caddies. So they're within the same bill, but they're within different exceptions.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And another question has come up. Please repeat how Prop 15 could affect privately owned semi-private golf club.
It would appear that most privately owned, in other words, non-equity clubs, are structured in such a way by selling memberships that even though they are not, the ownership is not a C7, near as I've been able to tell in doing research, for tax purposes, they are treated identically to the C7 clubs. I would also add, because it's an example that came up in Orange County of a daily fee facility, not even semi-private, but a for-profit business that is, which we discovered is in all of them in Orange County are zoned as open space. So in essence, they're not treated any differently for the purposes of property taxes. In this particular one, we're aware because it was a proposal to develop it. The community opposed it. Turns out that some city council members were for it because literally just by switching the zoning from open space, to potentially, not before you even develop it, if it can just be zoned residential, it then goes, its valuation immediately goes up 14-fold. That is the difference between the two. So the answer, again, this is going to be uncomfortable. And Kevin Fitzgerald and I have talked to veteran tax lawyers, tax law professors, and the one thing that all those discussions confirmed us in is that the degree to which our answers are ambiguous, and the degree to which we say some of these things are unknown. We can tell you what we know, but we can't tell you what will happen in the future. That meant we understood it, not that we didn't understand it, because we sat those conversations out because we assumed that when we couldn't definitively answer a question like this, there was something wrong with us. But if we talked to some experts, and some of the best in the state who understood the issue, they would give us the answers, and I'd be able to answer it more definitively now. But I just gave you the definitive answer. So there's some ambiguity built into that. And if I would say that if there's the greatest danger in 15 is not the specifics in the initiative, but that it opens up a can of worms that maybe ought not be opened. And I'll make a final comment that tax policy by initiative is per se bad policy. I would have said the same thing about Prop 13 in 1978. That the problem, whenever you shift one tax, it affects 15. It affects everything, and they all play off each other. And some taxes have gone up, some have gone down, and it's the total. And I apologize again for not being more definitive than that, but I think I gave you the answer. And part of it, and one of the reasons, and this is something personal, and this is something that I mean, this is a personal opinion. I believe, and I think I'm not alone in this, that it would have been a huge mistake for the golf industry to get itself in the crosshairs of this particular debate, because it would have exposed some of these things I talked about today, which some have called special privileges in the tax code. And if that ends up in the public realm and on the front page in an era of populist politics, you can guarantee that moving forward, it's going to be the subject of future discussions. And it may even become the reason that certain decisions ultimately after this that are discretionary by the legislature and even by county assessors will not go our way by virtue of that. And anyone who doesn't think that, even if it doesn't think that courts and administrative agencies aren't affected by what they think is public opinion, they need to look, they just haven't looked long and hard at how those decisions are made. So this is something where the golf industry needs to be extremely, extremely cautious about not getting itself enmeshed. In case you hadn't noticed it, we're not always popular in all quarters with all people. And many of those people have a majority of both, whether it's boards of supervisors, they have majorities in the state legislature, and we need to be very careful of that.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you for your insights again on these ever complex issues. And as we've said, you have guided us through these formats with the California Nevada chats, but also in the California Alliance for Golf, when to be aggressive and when to hold. And as you just described, this is another one of those situations where it behooves us to some extent keep a low profile depending upon the issue itself. So Craig, thank you. And all right, ladies and gentlemen, time to start winding down. Liz, 11:15, and I'd like to start with our section president, Dee Moriarty, for some closing remarks. Dee?
Thanks, Len. Once again, Len and Tom, thank you for putting together a wonderful session. To Dr. Landsberger, thank you for everything you provide for us. The more information we have and the more often we hear it, I think the safer we'll be. And we hope that definitely moves us in the right direction. And Craig, thank you. You've been a trooper. It's always good to hear you. You always give us the information that we need, and you're with us, every week. So it's really appreciated. So everybody be safe. Continue to make golf safe, and we'll check in another couple weeks. Back to you, Len.
Thanks, Dee. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Len, and thanks to Dee, and thanks to Bryce and everyone else, you in particular, Len, Dr. John, thanks so much for spending some more time with us, keeping us informed as to what's going on out there, especially this week with some really deep insight and information, and of course, Craig and Kevin. One thing I'd like to remind you is that you can access these recordings of these chats, whether they're archived or the most recent, on our SCPGA YouTube channel. Welcome you to do that. Also, as a reminder, along with 4 Magazine, Craig does an article in the Southern California PGA Program magazine as well, always informative, and that'll be published the end of this month, beginning November. So look for Craig's deeply important information every issue, whether it be 4 or the Program magazine. So thank you all again, and thank you all for taking your time to listen in and share some time with us. We look forward to a couple of weeks. And again, stay safe and responsible and take care of yourselves. So thanks again. Len?
Okay, Tom, thank you. So to the teams of both sections, the state of California and the state of Nevada, for allowing this to happen and continue it going. For everybody attending, we're really grateful that here we are. It feels 6 months away from when it started, but boy, it feels like we've been at this for a long, long time. That our attendance for these sessions is still strong, and that lets us know that we're doing the right thing. To Dr. Landsberger, Dr. John, thank you again. Craig, thank you again, and Kevin, for all the information that you're supplying behind the curtain, if you will, to keep us informed and on the right path. So as Tom mentioned, and Dee Dee mentioned, we are now on a 2-week schedule. So our next session will be October 23rd, Friday at the same time, 10 a.m. Thus far, we have both Jeff Price, the Chief Commercial Officer of the PGA of America, along with Jonathan Ride, the CEO of Supreme Golf. As you may have read recently, the PGA of America has withdrawn from the Tee Time Coalition that was set up about 5 or 6 years ago, and Supreme Golf is now launched as a Tee Time platform for national, ultimately flowing down to our sections, ultimately flowing down to the facilities within our section. So we look forward to Jeff and Mr. Ride, again, the CEO of Supreme Golf, educating us on how that's going to work and benefit us as a section, as an association. So as has been said, please be safe. There's so many things going on at one time, and let's keep the simple things in mind. Wash our hands, wear our masks, and get our flu shots. Good weekend, everyone. Be safe, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Bye.